Okay, so Keith, one time Thurman, has decided he wants to call out Jaron Boots Ennis for his next fight. Keith Thurman has said he's really keen to get that fight made. And, we've recently seen Keith Thurman call out a number of the top names at 154. Those being the likes of course, Jaron Boots Ennis, Tim Zhu, and Virgil Ortiz Jr., and even Sebastian Fundora. Now, all of these guys, in my opinion, would walk through Keith Thurman at this point in his career. Of course, Keith Thurman at one point was an undefeated world champion at welterweight. He was a WBA and I believe WBC welterweight champion. So, achieved the highest level in the sport, right? And there was at one point, Keith Thurman was one of my favourite boxers. He was known early on in his career for having a lot of power. That's why they called him Keith One Time Thurman, because he only needed to hit you one time. By the time he started to face consistently the really world level guys at welterweight at that time, your Danny Garcias, your Sean Porters, etc., he showed that he didn't really have, his power didn't really translate and didn't really have power against those sorts of guys. That being said, he was still able to win boxing matches against those guys, and that's something that I don't want people to sleep on with Keith Thurman, because often when you've got a puncher, a boxer who's known for his big punching power, and then that power goes, you're sort of like, well, what have you got left? A lot of these guys aren't actually that good of boxers, but they're really big punchers. Keith Thurman was one of those guys that, despite not being able to really stop guys like that anymore, he was still able to use his boxing fundamentals and still win those fights and use his advantages. Of course, he did stop that guy, Jarvis, who he fought in March earlier this year. But Keith Thurman, no doubt, would be looking to make a campaign at 154, but I think he's too old. That fight against Pacquiao, it really did expose his sort of level and exposed major flaws in his career, in his style. And ultimately, when you lose like that against Pacquiao, I don't fancy you to sort of make the adjustments and come back from that, especially at this point of his career. You do sort of imagine Keith Thurman, if he was able to get one of these big fights against these guys at 154, they would just walk through him. I'm probably put a beating on him quite badly. Because in all honesty, Manny Pacquiao almost boxed rings around him, to be honest. And this was not a prime Manny Pacquiao by any stretch of the imagination. This is Manny Pacquiao who'd been through wars, a number of losses, and was able to beat an unbeaten Keith Thurman at the time, an unbeaten world champion in Keith Thurman. Honestly, it was a really good performance from Manny Pacquiao, but, really wasn't a good look for Keith Thurman. And Keith Thurman's boxing career never has really recovered from that. He's fought since, he's won since, but there's been nowhere near the hype around his name that he had before he fought Pacquiao and he was an undefeated world champion. Right, that loss really derailed his career, and understandably wanting to get his career back on track by calling out some of the big names at 154. But Boots in particular, it would be a bad night. It'd be the sort of night beating that I'd want to see Keith Thurman retire after. I mean, to be fair, if he was to fight Boots Ennis and then retire, then, you can look back on his career and you're like, well, he's not had that bad of a career. Beat some top names at welterweight, Sean Porter, etc. Lost to Manny Pacquiao, lost to Jaron Ennis. That's not an awful career. Right, it's not an awful career. He was undefeated world champion at welterweight. Would have fought Boots Ennis for a championship at 147, sorry. He would have fought Jaron Ennis fought Jaron Ennis for a title at 154, sorry. He was an undefeated world champion at 147, is what I was trying to say. So he's had a hell of a career, but Boots Ennis is too slick, too fast, too powerful for a guy like Keith Thurman to actually have any success. And in my opinion, he's really got no chance in winning this fight. But there is a part of me that does respect Keith Thurman for making this call out. There is. Because a lot of guys in his situation either wouldn't have made the call-outs or would have been fine maybe fighting at a slightly lower level against winnable fights, because these fights aren't winnable in my opinion. But yeah, another episode of the Seth Solo Side Quest in the bag. Let me know what you think of Keith Thurman's call-out. Do you think Keith Thurman could get this fight? And if he does get this fight, do you think he can beat Jaron Ennis? I'd be curious to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. And I'm out. Peace.